It's now time to start looking at ActionScript a little bit more in depth. From here, we're going to start with ActionScript 3, and notice I've just created a plain document here, and it says ActionScript 3. So we just chose File, New, selected an ActionScript 3 document, which is the default behavior for Flash CS3. So let's collapse our panels here, and we're going to work inside the Actions frame right now. First thing I'm going to show you is a trace. So we're just going to type trace, and basically what trace will do is it will display whatever we put in there. Now the reason we create traces is to make sure our code is working, and we can put little traces in at key places and then it'll return a value. If it doesn't return a value, then we know something's broken. And so we use traces quite a lot in ActionScript programming. It's a very good way to get around and see what's happening, and as we go you'll see that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create our very first trace statement. And we're just going to create the open and close parenthesis there. And inside it, if we were to give just type a straight number and it would be straight figures, it would be called a variable. And you'll learn about variables in a second. So we need to put them inside quotation marks if we want to directly quote something. So we're going to do this. It's almost mandatory to create a hello world. This is the first thing in any programming. The semicolon at the end is not necessary. It just tells us we've reached the end. It's similar to a period in a sentence. It's a good practice to put it there, but the code will work without it. So basically we're going to do trace hello world. Let's test it. And we're exporting the Flash movie. And then notice in our output panel there, it says hello world. That's great. That tells us that everything is working. That's good news. So now we want to take it a little bit further. Now let's look at variables. Let's create a variable, and to create a variable you use the var keyword. Now what is a variable? A variable is basically a container that holds information. So rather than putting the information directly into something, we can put it inside that container and then call the container at any time. For example, say we want to do this trace. Instead of tracing the hello world, we want to trace it as a variable. We could call the variable just h, which is a lot easier to type throughout our code than hello world every time. So let's try it. We're going to say var h, which is setting the variable. Then we're going to use the colon. Then we have to give it a type. The main types to worry about is a string, if it's going to be text. You could use a number. You could use a boolean for true or false. You'll see there's different types of strings, but the main ones are different types of variable types, but the main ones are strings and numbers. So we're going to use a string. And then we're going to choose equal. And what equals does is it just assigns the variable. And then if we just define a variable here, and it's a string, equals hello world. So basically h has now become a container for hello world. And notice we'll get rid of the quotation marks and we'll just put h in there. So now we've defined a variable, and now we can do what is called calling the variable inside the trace. Let's test it. And there we go. It still says hello world. So this is very useful. Anytime we could change this, we could change it to hello cruel world. And notice we're not changing the trace at all. We'll just test it. And notice now it outputs as hello cruel world. So basically what it's doing is whatever we change here is changed inside the variable. Another good time to use variables is when you have a lot of code and you have the same thing more than once. Say for instance we could be loading the h, we could be loading this into a text where it's going to display inside a text box, or we could be using it as an image perhaps. We could give the address of an image, and when we use it more than once inside of our action script, well, if we need to change it to something else, then we would need to go inside every time, find every instance of it, and change it. Whereas if we just use a variable, you change it once, and every instance of the variable updates. Kind of similar to a cascading style sheet in some ways, in an oversimplified manner. But of course, a string is a little bit different. I mean, a variable is a little bit different. We'll use them for numbers, we'll use them for strings, and you'll see these as we begin to program more with ActionScript. So what if we want to mix a variable with a straight string inside our trace statement? For instance, we could say We'll change this to it's cold. And we'll put our little thing there. And we'll put a space in the end because we want this space to change. And now we're going to change this variable from age to weather. You can name these variables anything you want as long as it doesn't begin with a number or using a reserved keyword. And of course you can have no spaces in there. So now we're tracing weather. Here we go. It says it's cold. All right, now if we want to mix the two together, what we do is we do weather plus, and now we can put something in. This is called string concatenation. And then we will say in December. And now we can test it. It's cold in December. So notice that what it's done is it's put it together. Here is our string. It's just a straight string because it's in quotation marks. And here's our variable. And information from that variable, being a container, replaces that. And then when we use the little plus there joins the two together. So that's the basics there of creating variables and working with basic trace statements.